Hi and welcome to this webinar. Today I'll be talking about mix setup. Setting up a mix is possibly the least sexy but most important thing in a mix. Mixing is all about control, and if you have a large amount of tracks, it's very easy to get basically bogged down with information and to get lost. So I think that the main thing in order to control a mix and to know what you have in your tracks and to be able to go through them quickly and basically to control the situation rather than be controlled by the situation is to prepare the mix properly. It might take a while to do. I've been doing it for a very long time, so for me it's a very quick process. So today I'm going to go through a few of the steps I carry out in order to set up a mix before I even listen to the sonic properties of the tracks. I just do specific tasks in a very specific order, and that gets me going. The most, I would say, important thing is to get the BPM right. Usually you would get it when you get the tracks sent to you, or if it's your project, obviously you would know the BPM, but sometimes you just get tracks. I get a lot of tracks to mix, and sometimes the BPM is not labeled. So the first thing would be to find the BPM, and this is extremely important because it can lead to loads of unnecessary complications if you don't get it as the very first step. So that's the very first thing I do. In order to do that, I'm just going to solo the kick and snare with the click, and obviously we can hear that they're not together, so I'm at 120 BPM, so obviously it's not going to work. One way of doing it is just visually. If I look at the downbeat, so this is the downbeat, the kick drum is doing the downbeat. Now if I assume that the downbeat would be on the grid, then I can just go and change the BPM until it falls on the beat, and that's one way of getting it. Now since we're talking about live drums, then it's not necessarily fall precisely on the beat, but in an area. So I can just, now I can hear that the click at 110 now is faster than the song, so I can slow it down, and then I can assume that it's going to fall on bar 10. So as I slow it down, I can see that this makes sense, and then so that's very easy just visually to do it. Now I would go and check on different places in the track to see that there's no drift in the BPM. So if it holds throughout the song, then I can be pretty certain that this is the right BPM. Another way of checking this would be when you have an automatic basically beat BPM counter. I have one here in Logic. Yeah, didn't get it right because it's playing a complicated part. Yeah, there you go. So it may take a while, but eventually it will get it. Obviously you would have something similar on your mobile phones and stuff. So from there I'm just going to, which is something I already done, to sort the tracks by groups. So I have my drums here, and what I do is I just color them because it's easy, and I have my color scheme that I use, so I know visually when I sift through the tracks, especially when you have like 200 tracks or something like that in a session, which I, you know, often do, maybe mostly over 100 tracks. It's very easy to have it color coded. So I color all the drums. We have some tambourine and a loop, so all these in dark, and then the bass is green, and that kind of immediately gives me a visual of where I am. So and then all the backing vocals in shades of, so here we have two groups, so in shades of orange. Actually one of them is a double track, and then the lead vocal in orange, double track in B yellow. So I have a very clear visual reference to what's going on. Guitars can be in blue, and keyboards in kind of purple. So that's what I have so far. I have the BPM, I have the tracks separated into groups, and then I'm going to tackle the drums. I can approach this in two ways. One is to leave it as it is, played with the feel and the timing. And the other way, if I want to pop it up a little bit more, I can quantize the drums, possibly the bass, tighten up some of the vocal parts, and let's see how we can go about doing that. The reason why I'm using Logic today is partially because of that function of quantizing drums, which is easily done in Logic. First of all, I'm just going to group the whole drum kit, and I'm going to use just the editing function of the group, so none of the level, panning, sands and all that. I'm just interested in the editing part of the of grouping, and I'm going to choose phase locked audio because I want to retain the phase relationship between the different mics recording the drum kit. So once I've done that, I can select all the regions and set them to slicing mode. Slicing mode basically finds the transients in the different tracks and set markers where the transient hits are. In order to get this right, I need to make sure that the kick and the snare, which are going to be the reference point for my quantization, are going to pick up only the relevant hits. In this case, I can see that the kick drum transients also pick up the spill from the snare drum. So I'm going to lower the threshold or the sensitivity until I can isolate only the kick drum hits. And I think that looks pretty good. Let me just zoom out to make sure. Yeah, here it missed one, so I can just manually go and edit. And I think that this looks pretty good. Maybe I can risk raising the sensitivity on the whole thing to get those quieter bass drum hits, but now I have a snare drum in there. So it may take a little while to do, but it's worth every minute, because once you get it right, then it's right, and then you know what you're dealing with. And as we'll see later, when talking about actually mixing the drums, it will be very beneficial once we start triggering samples. So for now, I'm just going to go with that, and then do the same thing on the snare drum. On the snare drum, I want to capture the snare drum hits and disregard the spill from the kick and the hi-hat. So since the snare is more transient in nature, I think, and the kick is further away, the mic kick is further away from the snare, then I can pretty much do it fairly straightforward. Here I have a drum fill. I want to get those two. And here again. Okay, this drum roll I'm going to leave out. We'll deal with it later. So now I have the kick and snare hits marked. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell Logic to ignore any of the other channels in terms of the quantizing reference point. So I wanted to just look at the kick and snare transients in order to use as reference point for quantization. So once I've done that, I can just go and quantize the whole thing. And then I can see that it shifted the hits. And now I can check it with a click. Let's just solo that. So that's dead on. I might want to consider adding swing to it or changing the quantization at certain points, like for drum fills and stuff like that. But for now, I'm just gonna leave it. One word about slicing. Slicing is actually, like the name suggests, is not time stretching. So the audio isn't changed in any way. It's just moved. So there's no degrading in the sound quality whatsoever, not in the transients and not in the continuous part of the hit. So it's very clear. It actually cancels out against the original if you make that test when you line up the original against the processed and reverse the phase on one of them. It will cancel out completely. So that's a very good way of doing that. Now we can move on to the bass. Since I quantized the drums, I may want to do the same thing with the bass, just so they fit together when mixing. So I'm going to check the bass, and I can see that the hits are fairly I'm just going to use that. Maybe I have some excess maybe I have some that I can get rid of, but for now I'm going to leave that. I'm going to quantize the bass as well. That's an initial stage of mixing where I'm just feeling out the tracks and getting a vibe on the drums and bass. Let me hear them together, quantized. So it's very tight, it's very solid. You know, it takes 5 minutes to do, and I can cancel it at any moment by just disabling the flex or slicing on all tracks, and then it's back to how it was recorded. So that's very easy to do. After I've done that, I want to look at the toms. So I'm going to take it out of the editing group mode, and I'm going to look at the toms because the toms have a lot of spill, which I don't, from the whole kit, which I don't really need. I want to isolate the tom hits. So I'm going to look for them visually, because they would be louder, so they're pretty easy to detect. And then I'm going to try and add transient hits, transient markers to the tom hits, making sure I don't miss any out. Yeah, I think that. So again, that may take a few minutes. Let me try to do it in one go. Maybe I can get it. Oh. Okay, maybe an edit here while I'm doing that. So I'm going to apply the same process to the rec tom number 2. So now we have all the transient points marked on the tom tracks. We can go and say split at transient markers, and what that will do is it will leave us with only the toms. Okay, so now when I have all the toms split by their transient hits, I can set them to a fixed length. So I have a certain length of all the toms regions. There's one that I don't need here. I need to go over them again to make sure they're all okay. Then I can check them all and set fade out to all of them so they kind of end up nice and smooth. So that might be too short, but I can deal with that later once I get to mix the drums. So all this is done before I've even listened to how it sounds. I just want to get everything in shape and in control. So the next step is to strip silence all the tracks. So I want to get rid of all the silence around the used region in order to save space, to make it visually clearer what part is playing where, and also to make it easier on the hard drive, especially when I have a large track count. I don't want it to bother playing the silence bits. I want it to just play what it needs to play. So I'm going to make the sensitivity at maximum. So basically in here it's just to detect 1% of level change, which is the most sensitive settings, and I'm going to allow it to have post detection silence to leave in. That prevents it from getting too many regions, and also making sure that the release time of the bass note in this instance is included within the region. So I want to make sure I leave maybe 3 seconds so I know that everything is included, and then I go and do that for all the parts in the song. Now on some parts, like on this lead guitar, you see that the the reverse guitar, you see that there's a swell. And I want to keep that fade in. So I know that this is not going to be sensitive enough, so I'm just gonna drag it back. So I know that I'm not cutting anything I shouldn't be cutting. This is really important, and it's definitely worth checking this out track by track to make sure that you're not cutting any of the actual recorded material. On backing vocals it's fairly easy to do, and it makes a lot of sense of getting it even per sort of phrase. So I know that they're nice and tight. I can zoom in later and check that there are no breaths. So for the vocals, for the lead vocal, I'm going to create another track for the breaths, and I'm just going to separate them into a different channel.
Want to contend? Go on.
So they're fairly easy to spot visually. I've been doing it for quite some time, so I kind of know what they look like. A way of actually hearing them clearer would be to just apply really heavy compression, and that will make them more audible.
Oh, there's always
as the dynamic range will narrow, so the breaths will in fact be higher in level.
And I don't.
So I'm just going to go quickly and separate them into a new track. Now once we have compression on the vocal, the breaths are going to be really, really loud, and a very good way of controlling them would be to just have them on a separate track where we can control the level and also EQ them separately to the main vocal. So once this is done, I can then go and drag them down to the double track and then to the backing vocals, and as you can see, they slice through those tracks, taking out those breaths, and then I can just delete that. That saves me actually having to do the same thing for the double track and the backing vocals, so I know that whenever there's a breath on the main vocal, it will be silent on the backing vocals and double track vocals. Now I want to group the backing vocals into
I'm doing my own thing.
Yeah, in this case 2 groups. So I'm going to select those 4 tracks and I'm going to assign them to bus 9, and then I'm going to select these 4 and I'm going to assign them to bus 10, and then I'm going to pan the odd ones to the left and the even ones to the right, and then I'm just going to grab the bus return or the subgroup track, put it above this group, and take bus 10 and put it above this group, and then I know that I separated through what they're actually singing. So I have one group of backing vocals and then I have the other group of backing vocals, and then I don't need to process them separately. I can just process the backing vocal group, and that has a few benefits, as we'll see later when we come to mix the vocals and the backing vocals, because if you apply compression, it kind of gels them together and makes everything more tight. But also, like I said, it's more controllable like that. The session is now looking, well, this is not finished. The backing vocals and the double track and the main vocal breaths are not finished, but that's mainly the only thing I have left to do. I can also go in and fade out. So actually I can look at all the regions that end with kind of long notes, select them all and apply a long fade, so I know that they end smoothly. I'm gonna leave the drums without stripping the silence out, because it just makes more sense like that, since they're all grouped, and if I want to go back to the group and change the quantize and all that, it could be better to just leave them like that. What I'm gonna do though is to cut the front, and then apply a long fade out at the end of the song, so the cymbals will fade out nicely. I can strip silence the loops, the loop and the tambourine, and I have a reverse loop here, but as you can notice, it will cut the front. So again, I'm going to assume that the sample started on the downbeat. Yeah, so I'm going to go to there and maybe help it with a little fade in, and that's pretty much it. I think that now we have a session that is ready to be mixed. I know the tracks, I know what's on there. I quantize the drums and bass in case I want to use that. I don't necessarily have to, but at least I've done it. And now we're ready to move to the next stage, which is actually mixing.